Glad you're here today. Thanks so much for joining. While we are waiting for everybody to sign in, why don't you share in the chat where you're calling in from, your affiliation, your role, your organization, and we'll get to know each other a little bit better, and we'll get started in a minute. Thank you, Weston. There's your instructions. Really excited to see everybody today. Allison calling in from New York.
It's nice to see faces of people I've worked with over the years, different stages of my life. So
Really
hello.
fun, right?
Some current.
Emily, welcome from Brooklyn. You've got some fans here, apparently, Tom.
Thank you, Emily. The check's in the mail.
We've got Baltimore represented. We've got David here from New York Auto Museum.
Wonderful.
Awesome. Well, let's keep populating that chat, but let's go ahead and get started. So thank you all so much, everybody, for joining us today. Really excited to gather together. We often have a theme centered around capital campaigns for these sessions. And today we're going to talk about hiring, and hiring during a capital campaign can be tricky, but it has a lot of similarities to a lot of other transition moments. So moments like a leadership transition, or when a founder steps down, or if your organization is going through some major programmatic changes. I think these moments are all applicable to really paying close attention to hiring for leadership positions, and being very intentional about that. And so we're really excited to dig into that. So to start, my name is Sandra Davis. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the founder and CEO of Donorly. Donorly works with small and mid-sized nonprofits at moments of growth and change to build their fundraising muscle using donor research, storytelling, and community building. We really love these growth and change moments. And I'm really thrilled to draw on the wisdom and knowledge of Tom O'Connor and Brenna Thomas from Tom O'Connor Consulting Group today. TOCG has an executive search practice serving arts and cultural organizations, and also provides consulting services in the areas of strategic planning, change management, and marketing and audience strategy. So Tom, I'll hand it over to you. Could you just start by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, thank you, Sandra. And it's really great to be with you and your Donorly colleagues and all the folks in the virtual audience here today. I'm Tom O'Connor. My pronouns are he, him. I'm based on the Upper West Side of Manhattan here in New York on Monsey Lenape land. And I am 20+ year veteran of the arts and culture space. Our firm, as Sandra mentioned, works exclusively in the arts and culture world, and we do a whole broad array of things. But for myself, I'll say that I've worked largely in the theater space, though not exclusively, and our consulting practice expands all different artistic genres. A few extra little tidbits to know about me is I'm also a licensed social worker, so that comes into the way that I do my work and the way that I think about the field and the way that I think about the humans that we are looking for organizations, and the way that we approach change. And so that'll probably come into play as we talk about transformational periods for organizations. Just a little extra about TOCG is to say that we are a team of 11, so we are lean, high producing, but a lean team. About half of that is our search practice, which includes the wonderful woman who is joining me today. So I will let her introduce herself, but really thrilled to be with you all and looking forward to the conversation.
Thanks, Tom. Take it away, Brenna.
Okay, hi everybody. I'm really excited to be here and really excited by the work of Donorly and my beloved TOCG, but it's great to be here and in conversation with all of you. Another colleague of ours is on the line too, Cynthia Furman, so she's listening in. Hopefully we'll hit our marks for her. I have been with TOCG doing search work for the last almost 2 years. But before that, I spent about 20+ years in New York working in a variety of different arts and culture organizations. So like Tom, I have been in New York City. I'm based in Brooklyn now, but worked at bigger organizations, smaller organizations, and mostly in every kind of corner of the development office too. So while I do a lot of searches for TOCG in the executive areas or I'm doing a director of finance or director of marketing, I do quite a bit of director of development searches. And so I'm excited to be part of this conversation today, and kind of get into the weeds of what challenges those searches bring up and how we can all help each other through them, and help the development directors that kind of take those roles on as well. So I think that's me. I use she, her pronouns, and yeah, I am based in Brooklyn on the Muncie Lenape land as well. So
Thank you. Thank you, Brenna. I'm really excited to talk about all of this. So before we get started, let's do a little housekeeping. As a reminder, the call is being recorded. And if you need closed captioning, go to settings, accessibility, and you can turn on the closed captions there. We're going to be selecting a series of questions from those submitted in advance, and we'll spend probably, I don't know, 10 minutes on each question. We'll see. And if you're here, we invite you to come off mute, introduce yourself, name, pronouns, title, and organization, and then state your question. And then we may have a few clarifying questions for you so that we can better process your question for you. And if you didn't have any time to submit a question, that's okay. Just go ahead and put it in the chat. Our colleague, Weston, here will be monitoring that, and she'll guide us through these questions as we go. And feel free to put any follow-up questions and comments and responses in the chat. Feel free to use the raise hand function to participate in the question. It's, you know, a lot of fun if we kind of have a great conversation here, and we can all learn from each other. So, you know, I just love having everybody participate. Okay, Weston, I'm going to pass it over to you, and you can get us started.
Thanks, Sandra. All right, I would like to kick us off with a question for Brenna and Tom about your process to get us started here. How do you organize yourselves around a search? And let's talk specifically for a director of development. We could trickle in a little bit of an executive director, but let's focus on director of development. Is that different for an organization going through a transitional moment, such as an upcoming campaign or big leadership transition? I mean, obviously, executive director would be a big leadership. So let's start with director of development.
I can get us started, and then I'll pass it off to Brenna to sound smarter. So let's let's just start by saying that with every search that we approach, whether it's a development director or a CEO of any type, whether it's an executive director or anything, we're really centering ourselves around the reality of what that person needs to walk in with and what they're going to be walking into. So what are the skills that are going to be critical for them to really have a grasp of coming in? Where can the organization afford some learning curve? And what are they walking into in terms of what are the sort of current circumstances? We recruit from a place of transparency in terms of being really clear about where the organization is, and in these times where finances are all over the map, and where organizations are grappling with a variety of different circumstances. We often hear, well, we don't want to scare away candidates, and we say, well, we want to scare away the right candidates. we want the people who are up for the challenge to be you know, getting excited. So in terms of the transformational piece of things, we really are coming at it from the perspective of, you know, targeting the right people, but really being effective storytellers of where the opportunity is for the organization, and what is really going to help somebody see themselves in the success that position presents. To the specifics of, you know, of a development role, I want to shut myself up and turn it over to Brenna and let her talk about some of the just specific considerations there.
yeah, I mean, we go through, we have a multi-phase process when we do any search, but that's inclusive of the development director, where we spend some time with the organization really in a discovery phase of really understanding where they're at, which is what Tom was alluding to. I think as much as we want to dig into knowing who the candidates are, we are also asking the organization to ask themselves questions. We will ask the candidates, why this, why now? But I think we also need to ask, you know, in terms of transformations and that change moment, you know, that's also a question the organization can ask in terms of themselves, in terms of the candidates they're looking for. Like, what are their priorities right now? And what are their obstacles right now that they need a certain type of candidate to overcome that in, you know, in their next chapter? So we do spend a lot of time on discovery and kind of talking through, and then really try to articulate a lot of those challenges or opportunities in the position profile that we create with an organization. And we often, get into the weeds in the position profile to kind of really make sure candidates know what's going to be part of the conversation going forward. Once that is out in the world, then we start doing a lot of outreach to candidates across the country. And we have a lot of good initial conversations with candidates and then back with the organization to kind of make sure both sides are getting as much information as they can to have fruitful conversations in the hiring process.
No, that's really interesting. And I'm thinking about from the organization side, you know, we talked about transparency. We met up earlier this week to chat. Thinking about the questions that an organization can ask themselves to prepare for, depending on where they're currently sitting in a campaign, in their general operating, and so on. Talking about things like, what role will each staff person play in a campaign, or how can they work as a team? Does that spark any other questions? I mean, how do those conversations go on your end? Do you lead them, or what do you recommend?
We definitely lead them with the organization. I mean, we try to talk to a variety of members of staff and board, especially in a development search. It's actually quite helpful to have a few conversations with board members who are involved in fundraising. And then, of course, you know, some junior staff that a development director would be overseeing too, to kind of see where some pain points exist. We also really try to assess what's going well and where there might be stumbling blocks, because I think there's a tendency to want a development director who can do everything and anything, right? But it is necessary to prioritize at points and really just identify, you know, where does most of the income come from? And where do we want the income to come from, which can start to direct us in one direction or another of like, do we need someone who has a ton of individual giving experience, or do we need someone who is on top of institutional giving and will grow the individual giving program? So we do get into the weeds, and I would say that we work on it in the discovery process, but it's kind of an ongoing conversation with the organization too, especially as they start to see candidates and see their strengths and weaknesses. You know, we can kind of all of a sudden really identify the challenges they're facing and help them make the decision around that.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is that it's no secret probably to anybody on this call that for the past at least 5 years, development searches are like a knife fight in a phone booth. So there's a lot of competition for. Sorry, my South Boston heritage from my family is coming through, but you know, there's a lot of competition, and so we have to really be focused on. We have to really be focused on, you know, to Brenna's point, you know, what are they going to have to work with? What is the real need? What are the real priorities? And from the other side of it, you know, how is the organization prepared to both support candidates, attract candidates, make it clear that this is a place that they're going to be able to do their best work, because, you know, that's a huge part of the consideration process for a candidate now. You know, I think that. And we'll talk more about this probably later, I suspect. But you know, I think that right now there is a lot of movement happening in the field, and I don't just mean people leaving jobs. I mean people staying for relatively short tenures, and a lot of it comes down to what I'm talking about here, which is that, you know, people find themselves in organizations where they don't necessarily feel like they have the tools, but they also don't. It's sort of looked to them as kind of come in and solve all the problems, or come in and save us from ourselves. And you know, the different supports that can be put in place to prevent that kind of perception is something we're also trying to work with our clients on, to make clear that this is a systemic, you know, if it's a systemic issue, then an individual is not the solution. So how are we preparing ourselves to support them as they make that transition?
I think that just speaking from the viewpoint of a former director of development, and that experience of my first director of development job, and all of those things were in place, and I had to learn a completely different, much more complex job than the previous job I was doing. And so needing this, not only needing the support to get to know the organization, to get to know the mission, to get to know all of the board members and leadership and the donors, but also to get to know a brand new job than you've ever, taken on before. So it is really a big transition for, even the most talented people, and something to keep in mind when you're hiring from a major gifts officer or, somebody who's done institutional giving. They'll have this extra, ladder to climb in order to be successful for your organization.
No, so with that, I want to ask, how or what can an organization do to determine the right hire for them if we're looking at a specialist within development versus a generalist? What are there questions to explore internally, or even if, and I want to bring this back to campaigns, like, are there additional skills that you're looking for in that might steer you in one particular direction between the two?
I can start us on this one, Brenna, if you want.
Mm-hmm.
I think, and this is where we are executive search consultants. This is where the consultant piece of things comes in. I mean, we are really coming in to sort of help the organization before we get started with any kind of outreach or search, to really do an inventory with them of what they have, existing on the team. So, when it comes to things like, thinking about, people with a specialty versus true generalists versus systems people, all those things overlap, of course. We can really get a sense of how much, where an organization can afford to sort of stretch a little bit, or where they can afford to cover things elsewhere, and what this person really needs to make sure they are the subject matter expert in. And that's really a big function of that discovery period at the top of each of our search engagements. I think that there's a real, we do ourselves a disservice, and I think that a lot of recruiters, frankly, not to name names, but a lot of recruiters do a disservice by just assuming that a title means the same thing everywhere, that a budget scale means the same thing everywhere, that a market has the same factors, in each organization. We're really looking at, what does the organization have to offer this person, or to complement this person, I should say, that can help to define what it is they have to really represent. So, in the context of a capital campaign, or something like that, which is, a major moment for an organization to kind of be, approaching a major change, we really want to understand, for example, if they've engaged counsel, or if they've engaged a capital campaign consultant around that work, how does that fit into the equation? How can that shift the expectations of what this person specifically needs to do? Just as you're hoping to train sort of contributors to a capital campaign to become long-term annual fund donors, just like how are you also in that moment trying to train your perhaps new development director who's stepping into this role for the first time? How can they learn from that capital campaign consultant to then carry some of that knowledge forward? So all of those kinds of things, I'm going a little far afield, but all of those things are in play when you're thinking about, what are the opportunities for that person, and how does that need to define what they need to come in ready to do. Brenna, you're always more concise than I am. What do you have to add to that?
I'm kind of going in a variety of different directions, but I think the generalist question is, I think, a really good one of like, can we find a generalist? I think this is something that organizations struggle with, is can we find a generalist, or do we need this specialist? And so I think that reality is real. And in a lot of ways, when we go through searches, sometimes we let organizations talk to both, so they can really see what somebody would bring in a variety of ways. The other tug is the person who can be out forward facing and is kind of smooth on their feet in all of those situations, versus the person who is really great at setting up systems and making the development office run in the best way possible. And those two things can both be in one person, but organizations struggle with that decision making too. And so again, we try to bring candidates with both skill sets to kind of so that an organization kind of can weigh what's feeling right, because while a lot of the decision can be about hard skills, a lot of it is also about soft skills and getting to know the person and the right connection. So we, as the search consultants, kind of try and do a kind of a whole view of all of those things when we're putting people in front of an organization, and try to bring all those factors into the conversation so that an organization doesn't feel, I don't think they can ever really make the decision based on just one challenge or one need.
That's really interesting. And I remember you've also brought up the difference just between skills and attributes in a candidate and weighing those two. I can jump into another question unless you have something to say about that. Okay, well, I also want to think about, we hear red flags often, and Tom and Brenna, you both had a really great response to reframing how we think about red flags, how a flag to one person in a search committee might be very different than to someone else. I'm curious if you could talk about that. And in your experience, like, are there true red flags that exist for everyone? I mean, what's your approach for balancing the many viewpoints of a committee in a search? Tom, you're smiling.
I'll jump in. I can jump in.
I'll let you wait and find out why I'm smiling. Go ahead.
I'll jump in. There's a few things that I was just thinking as you were talking about it. One thing that's interesting about development director hires is that they're not always a committee decision. It's usually a hiring manager, or sometimes, an executive director and an artistic, a partnership. But and obviously the board may have, and team may have like input, but not, it really is one person. So they don't always have a committee can balance each other out, and really play into what you just said. A red flag is for one person is not a red flag for another. So a committee can be very useful in that, in regards to screening people and really considering everybody. But when you're working with a hiring manager, and if you're an executive director hiring a development director, there is kind of a tendency, because these positions are so hard to fill, to be like almost looking for the red flags from day one. And so I think as a team at TOCG, really, we're very committed to candidate care and taking care of people and being transparent when we take care of our candidates. And the red flag angle is kind of part of that. So we try to encourage hiring managers to not just think about red flags, but think about what strengths are there, or what might be missing in someone's resume, so that the question can be like, have you done this, or do you have experience with this, as opposed to, why do you have this red flag that I'm imagining, right, on your resume. I think that's how I approach it. I really kind of want to turn the conversation from, this is a red flag, this is a red flag, this is a red flag, because these searches are so hard. We have to kind of start from a positive place of like, what does this person have that could be useful? And if they don't have the right things, then we can move on. But yeah, I tend to flip the red flag conversation on its head.
I mean, it's interesting too, because what you said before about, the strength of, being a great major gifts officer, solicitor, versus the strength of running a really solid program. And those don't often exist in the same person. And so if you want to describe it as a red flag, every person who you're trying to hire for this role, which is a complex, broad role, is going to have missing puzzle pieces.
For sure. The reason why I was smiling before is because I was trying to make a calculation of whether I should use coarse language on this Friday afternoon. I might use just a little bit, which is to say
Slightly
that
I
try slightly, which is to say that I subscribe to the idea that 100% of people who speak in absolutes are assholes. So I try not to do that. But in terms of red flags, I do think that often when we're talking about red flags in hiring, we're responding to the scarcity of time. We have to sort of get through a bunch of candidates in a short period of time. So we're like, what can I look at that can make me say like, no, this person's off the table. I would encourage people, especially when you're working with a company like us who is taking that off of your plate, and we are giving the due diligence to evaluate each candidate, to give a little bit more grace to people that you would look at with us having somewhat of a red flag. That being said, a couple that I know that are common refrains regardless of role, but that I try to challenge a little bit more these days, is one that I referenced already, which is tenure, length of tenure. Now, if somebody has 10 jobs for 7 months each, I understand that that's a red flag. I'm not questioning that. But with all the turnover that's happened in the field and with the volatility of the performing arts field in particular, and the arts field more broadly, over the past several years, we've been really trying to ask both our committees and our hiring managers to give that person a chance to tell their story in a way that can help to really understand why those changes have happened. Sometimes it can be because they're a highly sought after person who's extremely effective. That happens all the time in the corporate world. You know, we see people who are CMOs or chief development officers or, you know, at large organizations, and if they're really effective, they're going to get snapped up in a year and a half or 2 years. That's not always the case. Sometimes a person, you know, has not as good a track record to talk about, but we suss that out in conversation if we see enough of the building blocks there. What I will say is, you know, there are some red flags that you know I do subscribe to, which are if someone has been in that job for 1 year and they talk about accomplishments that are far outsized for a 1 year tenure, like a multi-year project or, you know, things like that. That's something that I'm going to want to drill into more often. So I say all that to say that, you know, there are plenty of things that we have developed a shorthand for to kind of make sense of the world, and I don't blame any of us for doing that as humans. But questioning that, especially in competitive markets, when we're trying to hire these critical roles in that overused term in unprecedented times, I think it sort of forces us to think a little bit more broadly and give people that chance. To say nothing of, even though it's a huge priority of ours, how equity plays into that in terms of opportunities afforded to people who've been historically excluded. So that's a whole other category. But yeah, I mean, I think that I'm a big fan of if somebody on paper looks like they have what you're looking for, and there are a few things that are giving you pause, giving them an opportunity to tell that story is so key, because we've been surprised so many times by people who can tell a really compelling story either about a personal circumstance that changed. You know, life is in session for all of us, folks. So like, you know, whether it's a family issue, whether it's, you know, anything, there are reasons why people change jobs. There are no shortage of toxic workplaces in the nonprofit space. And so there are reasons why I can perfectly respect somebody having a short tenure. So all of those things and their ability to convey and to speak to those kinds of things. I'm using the tenure piece as just an example, but you know, somebody's ability to tell you that story in a way that is respectful, that is clear, that is logical, you know, can really turn around a candidacy. And I find that for almost anything that we would consider a red flag. So rant over.
No, that's great. And I think from the side of anyone who might be listening who is who has been we've all been in a search at some point, to hear this kind of like openness of opportunity and potential, I think is really lovely to hear. I want to take us in a slightly different direction, acknowledging Donorly as capital campaign consultants, TOCG as helping to fill a lot of in-house development roles. I know that those two can work really well together, but they have to be in partnership. I'm curious if from the TOCG side, are there things that we as consultants can do to help your candidates maybe about to start in a development role, and vice versa? Like, how can we work together?
Over to you, Brenna.
I would say, I mean, there's a few things. I was thinking at first about how we can collaborate, like as a search consultant and a capital campaign consultant. You know, I've done searches where I've gotten to meet with the capital campaign consultant, which is hugely helpful actually for the search consultant to hear from the capital campaign consultants, like what the team needs, you know, what they're up against and what's coming down the, you know, often capital campaign consultants have an eye on what's coming down the pipe for the organization. So, that has been helpful. And then I also think the capital campaign consultants just got to be ready and willing to like Sandra explained, there's going to be such a learning curve for anybody coming into a new role, to kind of support them and just be a partner to them and realize that it's going to take them some time to get up to speed. I think the other thing that's helpful is for us to be able to really articulate to candidates what role they will play when they arrive in the campaign. So often, if the campaign is far enough along, they're really just kind of joining in, and the, you know, potentially the executive director and the board chair or the campaign chair are really doing all of the meetings and are kind of out making the asks, and the development director is just coming in to kind of be behind them and understand how those asks are happening, when they're happening, and if they don't go right, are they being funneled back into general operating support, like is in a strategist role, is it an administrative role, or are they being called, is it earlier in the campaign and they're going to be part of that solicitation team, or that research is going to be factored into their department's work. I think really getting clear on what type of role they'll play is helpful, particularly if they've never been through a capital campaign before, which is often the case. I mean, a lot of people have, and they've been exposed to various phases, but they may not have been through the whole thing. So that's the other thing, is to know from the organization and the campaign consultants where they're at in the process and what they're going to need from that person once they join the team.
I would also say, so we've had some overlap with various organizations over the years, and to the extent that the organization brought us in to the process of the search. So, sharing the information that you're creating, allowing us to share some of our work with you so that you can factor that into how you're thinking about candidates. So if we've got a fundraising plan, or, a campaign plan, whatever it is, making sure that you, the search team, have access to that information so you have a fuller picture. And even, being able to talk about and interview us, the campaign consultant or consultants, around our viewpoint of the organization and what we think, because we're really sitting very close to that seat if we're working with the organization. And I think we have some insights that that leadership or board don't have. So I would just say, any organization that's doing a search, really think about bringing any consultants in to be part of that conversation.
Yeah, it can be really helpful. And I think the other thing that candidates tend to want to know is how the campaign goals interact with the general operating goals too, and what's the cannibalization fears can be kind of, is it risky, or what is going to be asked of me beyond the campaign? Those are some questions that come up too.
Very nice. Thanks. And we got this next question from Anne-Marie Smith, who I don't believe she's joined the call, but Anne-Marie, if you're here, please come off mute. From the Reading League, who asked, if you know that a capital campaign is likely in the next 3 to 5 years for an organization, what are some things that you could start doing now as an organization and to prepare for that? I think this could be a little bit from the Donorly side, but also thinking about hiring. What positions might we explore having in place? How far out should we have a person in place, and so on? And for this org, they have less than 300 individual donors, but they're a national organization that's been previously grant funded. So they're working on, I think there's a lot of general operating movements to expand their annual budget.
And we don't know how big their campaign is, or they don't have a dollar number, right?
Unfortunately, it was not provided.
Okay. I mean, I think I'll jump in first. I think that the work they can do right now is build their individual giving and really thinking about major gifts, what a major gifts pipeline looks like, and how to grow that program, because kind of a big factor in a successful capital campaign in general is going to be already a solid major gifts program. Givers give, and givers who give, large amounts will consider a major capital gift, and that's really important to start out your campaign strong. So there's a little bit of time. It takes a while to build up a major gifts program, but there's a little bit of time to do that, and making sure that you've got that resourced in a good way will set you up for success. What else, Brenna, Tom?
All I was going to say is, from a hiring standpoint, I think we wouldn't necessarily be looking at solely like W-2, let's say W-2 employee resources and approaching this kind of thing, because you don't want to necessarily be duplicating, you know, what a capital, if you're using an external capital campaign resource for a set period of time. But my inclination was largely the same as Sandra's in terms of individual giving, whether that's prospecting resources, research, you know, all of that. It's just a matter of how much you're envisioning on the other side of your campaign, needing those folks, you know, on an ongoing basis for your annual fund or annual operations. So that's what I mean by maybe they're not permanent employees, but beefing up your resources in that area. But Brenna, this is probably far more in your wheelhouse than mine, so I'll yield the floor.
Well, I also think the interesting thing to do ahead of time is to start talking to consultants, because to figure out how much staffing that's going to provide or not provide, and that may dictate how you staff up as well. I think, yeah, I think it's probably always a budgetary decision about how much you can increase your staff size versus pay consultants to kind of cover some of the workload.
Yeah, and if you have a really strong solicitor or two in your executive director, CEO, board chair, they can do a lot of the work of major gift cultivation and solicitation if they have time. And so then a lot of that work can be systematized by somebody else. You don't necessarily have to hire a fancy major gifts officer to do something like this. And you can outsource a lot of that work. And it's interesting though, Tom, to talk a little bit more about the idea of thinking about what happens on the other side of the campaign. And this is one of the things that really excites me about campaigns, is that, you know, you go in saying, oh, we need to raise $20 million. Let's find that money, not really thinking about what happens afterwards. But the huge opportunity is to build a whole new group of donors, or to raise the bar for your current donors in terms of what they're willing to and wanting to invest in your organization after a new building is built, or after you know, your milestone campaign, your 100-year campaign or whatever is completed. And to think about, and we always want that for our clients, like we really are thinking about that along the way. But to think about what staffing you might need at that moment too, and thinking about, even if you're hiring somebody only to support the campaign and it's being paid through the campaign, because that's another opportunity that you don't see. You know, you don't necessarily have to pay these employees or these outsourced resources through your regular annual budget. You can pay through the campaign. And then is there an opportunity after the campaign to keep those folks on, but in a slightly different role? They'll know your organization so well. They'll know all of your donors so well. And I suppose to be able to tell that story to potential candidates is important as well.
Be able to bake in some time for that person to have some runway to see how successfully they can take some of those capital gifts and some of those relationships and extend them into sort of repeatable annual relationships, and all as part of your plan, even if you can't budget for them to be involved permanently, you know, having some runway for them.
I have a curious question. This is now from me. Thinking about either
You're in the hot seat, Weston.
hiring and having that runway versus hiring while in a campaign. Are there big, like I can think of big differences, but how does that change? Does that change your process? Does that change the conversations that you're having? I'm sure that there's more urgency when you're in a campaign versus the runway, but curious to hear from you.
Since Brenna's just done this on 2 or 3 searches, I will yield to her.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I mean, I think I feel like there isn't much of a choice, you know. Most people obviously want to have a development director all the time throughout any chapter, right? But I've actually just done a few searches where people are in the midst of the capital campaign, different stages. And they have done the campaign has fulfilled a certain need that they have to, for the organization to move forward in a variety of ways. And they have campaign consultants, and they have the leadership of the organization, and they're able to move it ahead. And like I said, then the director of development is really coming in and kind of helping them with kind of the back end administrative stuff for the campaign, and is starting to bring that idea of how can we take these relationships and move them into the next chapter beyond the campaign. How can we benefit from all the work that we've done during this campaign and the success of it, ideally? Yeah, I think it is tricky. It is funny that I've done a few of these, but I think campaigns, it feels like a lot of people say, everybody's having, the campaigns are nonstop in a lot of
Yeah.
ways. Yeah.
And, you know, coupling that with the typical tenure of this role, it's quite likely that you won't have a director of development who's going to be there for the 5 years
Of a
of a
campaign.
campaign from the planning stage all the way to the end. So,
Mhm.
you know, that may be more common than not.
Especially in a small to mid-sized organization, where if they're showing their prowess in that at that scale, they will very often be snatched up by an organization that is, you know, can pay them a little more at a larger scale.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. I have one last question. And I'd like to take this opportunity in case anyone is listening and is interested in working on a campaign, but might not have the quote unquote right experience. And could we talk about how a candidate's comparative skills or experience can be communicated or understood in the hiring process? You know, if they don't have the experience, how can they make themselves known?
I'll start, I think,
Mhm.
and I'll give Brenna a break, and then she can fill in the gaps. But you know, I think that um, there are two things that I think, and this is a broader answer than just this one circumstance, but there are two things that I feel like can really allow somebody to step into something that they may not be perfect, you know, on paper, perfectly well equipped for from their experience, and that is self-awareness and clarity. Like, so like if somebody comes to and when I say clarity, I mean clarity of understanding of what the opportunity actually entails. I think there are a lot of people that want to either gloss over or minimize the things that they haven't done as a way to say, oh, of course I can do this. But when a person really comes to you and says, here's what I've done, I know that that's not exactly what this role is looking for. I know that that's not exactly the charge of this moment for this organization, but here's my understanding of what the charge is and what it really is going to take to do this. And here's why I think I can rise to that. And that clarity of I don't even want to call it learning curve, but their approach to stepping into a role like this. The number of cover letters and resumes we get that read like they could be written by AI that don't really address these things in any kind of, and some of them now are, of course, but that don't speak to like the specifics of this opportunity, it's a bit disheartening, if I'm honest. But when somebody has really sort of done the work to, and I don't mean, you know, days and days of research, but has given the thought to, you know, what the opportunity is for this organization and how their skills and what they've done can map to a portion of that and how they're going to make up the difference, to convey that in a really thoughtful way in your materials, and perhaps, you know, getting a reference or somebody like that to speak to you on your behalf to your adaptability and growth potential goes a long way. I think especially when you're in a smaller mid-sized organization where the competition for these kinds of roles is going to be very difficult. It's going to be, you know, because it is such a competitive market right now, and folks who do bring all the experience and have checked all the boxes are going to be able to write their own ticket in a lot of other places. Being open to this kind of creative or I don't even want to say non-traditional, but sort of like creative growth potential moment for a particular candidate. That kind of appraisal of the opportunity and personal storytelling from a person, to me, can go a long way. But the person, again, just to reiterate, the person who tries to minimize it or say that it, you know, that oh, of course I can do that, or of course, you know, this is doable, I think that's one of the red flags to me for any job, not even just for development directors. But anyway,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think that's a turn off for us. But I think the willingness, I agree with Tom that the willingness to learn and that growth, that idea of growth potential is going to be essential for anyone. So I think if a candidate can identify it, what their growth potential is, and makes a case for their ability to grow, I think that That's going to be really necessary, especially for that whole going back to the idea of a generalist versus a specialist. If you're a specialist in one area, but you are ready to do all the others, and you have already like started in this way or that, that's a really great case to be made. I think the other thing that I thought about with Weston's question about like what are the comparable skills, I think that gives a candidate a moment to ask questions about where the campaign is. So is the campaign in a moment of really going after large institutional gifts? Has the board been engaged, and have each of the board members made their gifts yet? Or is it a public phase moment where it's about gathering into smaller individual gifts? Because that would give the candidate a chance to explain how they've done comparable work in any of those areas, even if they haven't done a capital campaign.
I think it's really interesting what you were saying earlier, Tom, about that AI written cover letters, and I was just thinking like these are all the skills that we want as solicitors to really kind of hone in on the relationship and the the specific motivation points for the folks that we're soliciting, and obviously a really tailored message letter case for support is something we want to see in the folks who are on our team. So it's a little clue or a little kind of analogy on how being able to really hone in on what you're saying in terms of self-awareness and clarity of where they can step up is maybe a little window into their style of solicitation, a little window into the style of being a development officer.
I definitely think it reflects the work that one might do when they get in the seat.
Yeah. You want to see how well somebody's really internalized the opportunity. And I think that, for all its positive functional benefits, things like AI and whatnot, like, they are clinical, and they sort of takes out the heart from it, and takes out the vulnerability, and takes out the sort of personal touch. And so like, when you approach, whether you're using AI or not, when you're approaching your materials that way, people can smell that.
Yeah. Big fan of AI, but yes, it requires a lot of your own work. It doesn't completely replace it.
Yeah.
And with that, that's the end of my questions for you all. Thank you so much. I'm going to pass it back to Sandra.
Thank you. Thank you so much for leading us today, Weston. I'd love to have any final takeaways if anybody wants to pop those in the chat. I think for me, the takeaways over this takeaways for me over this conversation and the conversation we had earlier this week is really, thinking about making a good match, and understand that we're dealing with humans, and just like your friendships and your romantic relationships, like there's a little give and take there, and that exploration, though, I think can be a really good fun thing, an interesting thing, even though it always feels trying when you're hiring folks. But it feels like ultimately you can get to know yourself and your organization a little bit better in the process when you're working with somebody who has some expertise in this area and can help guide you. So I think that's my takeaway. Feel free to pop anything else into the chat if you have it. So Tom and Brenna, I just really appreciate you joining today and sharing your wisdom. Really was a great session, and I think we've given some really valuable information to everybody. So I really, really appreciate that. I just want to make sure that we're sharing details on ways to connect. So Donorly.com is where you can find me and all of my team. And on the socials, where our handle is @_Donorly. And then you can find me on LinkedIn as well. We'll put that information in the chat. And Tom and Brenna, where are the best places for people to connect with you? Tom, I'll let you start.
Sure. I can pop some things in the chat myself, but our LinkedIn is
We
usually the
gotcha.
best place. So you got me? Okay, good.
We gotcha. Yeah.
LinkedIn is usually the best way. You can also, if you are a job seeker, you can visit our website, tomocgroup.com, and sign up for email alerts for all of our searches. We also share some sort of thought leadership content. We also share all sorts of different resources from our different consulting divisions as well. So all that is in the chat. Feel free to visit us there. Now I'm going to let Brenna talk while I read what's in the chat here. Katie.
And reaching me via email is the best. I do have a LinkedIn link there too, but email, I'm happy to correspond and be in conversation with folks.
Yeah, let's thank you, Brenna, and thank you, Tom. And Katie's takeaways. Let's see. I've experienced recruiting or search process where there was lovely and somewhere there was a lack of clarity, which made it challenging. Wanted to understand the challenges you all face as consultants. I think having experience on the other side of it is helpful too when you're in the role someday of, hiring and working with a search firm. So that's great. Thank you, Katie. And thank you so much again, Tom and Brenna. We will be sending an email out probably early next week since we're on Friday, but we'll send that out with a video of the call here today and all these contact details. So you'll have those handy and some details about our upcoming April session. So in April, we're going to be talking with Jessica Merrill, who's founder and CEO of 1 Degree Impact. Her firm specializes in outsourced grant research and writing, and we'll have a good, fun conversation about all of that. That is scheduled for Friday, April 25th at 1 p.m. We're always on the last Friday of the month at 1 p.m. ET. And we hope to see everybody there. This was so much fun. Thank you. And would love to connect with everybody on LinkedIn.
Indeed. Thank you all.
Have a great weekend, everyone.
Thank
Katie,
you.
feel free to drop us a line on LinkedIn if you want to explore your
I
question.
will.
Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Take care.